we are looking at the triumphal entry of Jesus Christ. And we kind of look at that every time we come around this time of year, but every time we look at these passages of Scripture, something is different, something is new. And as we kind of look at the Scriptures, that's the amazing thing about the Scripture is as you look through the Scriptures, God reveals new things to us every time we read the Scriptures. And as I'm kind of going through the Scriptures this week, getting ready to do this huge thing on Palm Sunday, I noticed something that maybe I just kind of read over and hadn't really paid attention to, and just God began to show me some things, and I just really am excited to share it with you this morning. So by God's grace, He often gives us what we need and not what we want. Notice I said by God's grace. Have you ever got something that you really, really, really wanted, and then once you got it, you're kind of disappointed? I remember as a little kid getting it, like I saw the commercial. Remember the commercials that were like geared toward recruiting children to buy things with their parents' money? And I remember as a little kid, I was watching this commercial. I really, really, really wanted it, and I got it. And I'm like, man, this toy is dumb. I mean, the whole commercial is based on your imagination, And because it's based on your imagination, you're just like, so it doesn't really make sounds. Things like all those types of things. And so you kind of get into this, and you're trying to figure out what am I supposed to do with this thing that doesn't do anything? And so you're kind of disillusioned, disappointed, and so often we get what we want, but it's really not what we need. And sometimes we ask God to give us stuff that we want, and we wonder why God doesn't give it to us because it's not what we need. Or if He actually gave us what we want, it would not be good for us. And so sometimes we wonder what's going on. So Palm Sunday kind of marks this moment where Christ enters Jerusalem for his final days, right? His final ministry here on earth. And we're trying to, and he's kind of going in, and he's fulfilling a lot of prophecies in this week as well. In John chapter 2, we begin to read this in verse 9. John chapter 12, verse 9, it says this. Now, a great many of the Jews knew that He was there. Speaking of Jesus. And they came, not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might also see Lazarus, whom He had raised from the dead. But the chief priests plotted to put Lazarus to death also, because on account of him, many of the Jews went away and believed Jesus. The next day, a great multitude that had come to the feast, when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, they took branches of palm trees and went out to meet Him and cried out, Hosanna, blessed is He who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel. Then Jesus, when He had found a young donkey, sat on it, and as it was written, fear not, daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt. And then verse 19, we see these words. And the Pharisees therefore said among themselves, you see that you are accomplishing nothing. Look, the world has gone after Him. It's almost like this moment where they just kind of like give up. Like, we can't do anything else. It's going nuts. The world's gone after Him. What are we going to do with this? Isn't it amazing how many times you can open the Bible and just God speaks to you and you're like, man, I've read this passage 100 times. What is this? And this week as I'm reading this passage, something jumped out at me that I thought, I really hadn't paid attention to that before. Who were they plotting to kill? Jesus. But who also do they want dead? Lazarus. Why? Well, because on account of him, many people were putting their faith in Jesus Christ. And they realized as long as he's alive, he's a living testimony of this guy. Remember, they're all in at this point. Even if some of them were having doubts like, hey, this might be the Messiah, it's a little too late, right? And now we got to deal with this guy because if he is the Messiah and he actually does start establish the kingdom on earth and begins to reign, we're all in a lot of trouble. And so we got some problems. So what's the backstory here? John chapter 11, verse 1. Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany. By the way, Bethany is where Jesus went and met with them before going in for that final journey into the Passover meal. Now, a certain man was sick, and Lazarus at Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. It was that Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. What an amazing understanding. The Messiah loves our brother. Right? He whom you love is sick. When Jesus heard that, he said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in that place where he was. Well, if you know the story, Lazarus dies while Jesus is not there, or while he's there. And then in verse 11, it says, these things he said, and after he said them, our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I may wake him. Then the disciples said, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get well. However, Jesus spoke of his death, but they thought he was speaking about taking rest in sleep. Then Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go to him. Well, when Jesus arrived at Bethany, Lazarus was already been in the tomb for 4 days. We find this in John chapter 11, verse 39 now. Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said to him, Lord, by this time there is a stench, for he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God? Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying. And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. And I know that you always hear me. But because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me. Now when he had said these things, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he did. The people were amazed. The sisters were amazed. Now, this is a new start for Lazarus. Now, can you imagine, though, being Lazarus? He's like in paradise. And this is awesome. Yeah, life is good. He's in paradise. And they ask him to return. Wait, no, Jesus, please. Oh, okay. Got to start over in that life? There's no air conditioning up there. You know? He comes forth. He comes back from the dead. Now, what teacher in the history of mankind raised people from the dead? Zero. So what's the reaction of the people? John chapter 11, verse 45. Then many of the Jews who had come to Mary and had seen the things Jesus did believed in him. You want to mute the Bluetooth for me, guys? Believed in him. But some of them went away to the Pharisees and told them the things Jesus did. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered a council and said, what shall we do? Now hold on. This guy's raising people from the dead, and your first question is, what are we going to do with this guy? You know, I would be thinking like, hey, I've got a mother over here. You know, I got a grandparent. Hey, can I get you to come over here? No, what are you going to do with him? For this man works many signs. So they're taking notice now. If we let him alone like this, everyone will believe in him. Well, of course. And the Romans will come and take away both our place and the nation. See, here's what's really going on. The religious leaders up to this point had used religion to control the people, control the masses. What they said went, even if it went contrary to Scripture. The religious establishments were controlling the people because if you don't come through us, you don't get anything. And so they're controlling the masses, but there was a greater fear than losing control. The fear was this: what will the Romans do if they find out that there's a guy raising people from the dead? Again, if I'm a Roman and I hear this guy can raise people from the dead, I'm like, hey, can I have a conversation with you? I got some friends, you know? But they're worried that the Romans will retaliate and have Jesus put to death. But not just Jesus, but all of the Jews. By the way, if the Romans come in and seize power and do this, who loses their power? Who loses their influence? Who loses their control over the people? The religious establishments. The religious Jewish leaders. Can't have that. So Jesus has openly brought a man to life who had been dead and rotting in a tomb for 4 days. Nobody questioned Lazarus' death, by the way. And their first response is, what will the Romans say? God's glory and power is on full display. In fact, Jesus prays this. He says, I'm praying this so that God's glory will be displayed for all of you to see. God's power is on full display, and they missed out because they were more fearful of what the Romans would do. They're more fearful of what might happen to them. They're more fearful of losing control. Listen, religious groups still do this today. Be warned. Proverbs chapter 29, verse 25 says this: the fear of man brings a snare, but whoever trusts the Lord shall be safe. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 28, Jesus says these words: and do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both the soul and the body in hell. And what we're learning from Jesus and we're learning from the Proverbs is this: when we're afraid, when we're fearful, why? Why do we let fear control us? Why do we let fear influence the decisions we make and how we live our lives? Fear shouldn't be that. You know what we should be afraid of? Spiritual matters. Man, I'm so afraid of sharing the truth with this person. What will they say? And they never hear the gospel of Jesus Christ because you chose not to say anything. We have an enemy. That enemy doesn't care who you are or how he reaches you or how he gets you not to follow after God. We have an enemy. And his greatest fear is this: that you will actually share your faith with other people. He does not want that. Does not want that. And so, where's fear lie? We should not be afraid of anything because fear brings a snare. It holds us down. It literally makes us so that we are captive to that thing. When we talk about Celebrate Recovery, overcoming the things that are holding us back, one of the major things we talk about is fear. And here's why. Because fear has a way of keeping us in the status quo. Have you ever been stuck in the status quo? And often because you're stuck there because the fear is of the unknown. Well, if I do things differently, then what will happen? Right? Maybe someone won't like it. It's okay. Why are we afraid of stuff? Why are we so fearful? See, the enemy brings worry. The enemy brings doubt. The enemy brings fear. So we need to learn to trust God, trust his plan, and rest in his promises. Trust God, trust his plan, and rest in his promises. Listen, the scriptures are full of promises from God. But will you trust them? That's where every one of us in our spiritual walk struggles. Because when we're facing the one thing in life that seems so overwhelming, we don't trust him. And when we fail to trust him, we're not trusting his promises. When we're not trusting his promises, there's not peace, there's chaos, there's not rest, there's worry and doubt, there's anxiety, because we're not trusting God in his promises. We're not trusting that God is completely in control, and whatever happens will happen. So instead of worrying, hey, God, how can you use this thing? In the midst of chaos, there's fear, there's worry, there's doubt. There can be confusion and stress. And in these times, we need to learn to trust God to bring to pass his perfect plan. These Pharisees missed out because they're so worried. There's an opportunity to believe. If you had any doubts that he had the power to raise people from the dead, like the Messiah can do, here it is. Still not good enough. Still not good enough. What will the Romans do? What will the Romans say? John chapter 11, verse 15. I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. He's talking to his own disciples, the people who should really get this stuff. He's about to go to the cross. So this is the timeline. He's almost there, and his own disciples still don't get it. And so he's saying, listen, I'm glad I wasn't there so that you can see what's about to happen. The enemy seeks to hold us back. Jesus used Lazarus' death to help the disciples believe and to trust. Because what the disciples were about to face was nothing like they ever imagined. They didn't know what was coming. I mean, they knew what Jesus was telling them, but they really didn't get it. Right? Have you ever tried to give counsel to a young person who's about to make a decision, and the decision is really stupid? Come on now. You're like, listen, if you do this, then this, and this, and this. Oh, no, I know what I'm doing. And then at some point, you're like, okay, come see me when you need me, But they make their own choices. Well, the disciples knew what was coming, but really didn't know what was coming. They didn't get it to the full extent. In his prayer, Jesus said this to his Father. He says, verse 42 of John chapter 11, and I know that you're always here, that you always hear me. What a lesson for us, by the way. If you're a child of God, guess who always hears you? Why do we feel alone so much? I know that you're always here, or that you always hear me, but because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me. This is an opportunity for people to believe on Jesus Christ, and many did. But where God is at work, guess who's also at work? The enemy. By the way, when you see hard things happening around you, instead of worrying about the hard thing, you need to ask yourself a question. Where is God currently working that this is happening? And how can I get involved in what he's doing? You see, oftentimes when hard things happen, when bad things are happening, we kind of tuck our heads down and just kind of go silent, right? We got to hide somewhere. We don't want to get involved. But if hard things are happening, the question should not be, oh, woe is us, how are we going to do this? Instead, the hard things happening, you should be asking yourself the question, God, where are you at work that the enemy would choose to attack us in this way so that I can get involved too? God, if you're working, I can expect the enemy working, so how can I get involved? John chapter 11, verse 45, 46. And many of the Jews who had come to Mary, these are the people who are basically, they're trying to comfort her, and had seen the things that Jesus did, believed in him. He did all of this. He allowed Lazarus to die so that people would have one more chance to believe in him. But some of them went away to the Pharisees and told them the things that Jesus did. Now, I don't know if their intent was like, hey, listen, you really need to come see what's going on. Or if it's like spies, right? Like they're trying to stir things up. I don't know what their heart was. The Bible doesn't tell us what it is. But we do see the response of the Pharisees in chapter 11, verse 49. And one of them, Cephas, being high priest that year, said to them, you know nothing at all, nor do you consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people and not the whole nation should perish. Now this, he said, he did not say of his own authority, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation. And not for the nation only, but also that he would gather together in one the children of God who were scattered abroad. Then from that day on, they plotted to kill him or to put him to death. So here's what's happening. The people go, they run to the Pharisees, like, hey, what's going on? You need to come see this. The high priest starts prophesying, not of his own authority or power, but God starts speaking through him because he is the anointed high priest. And he basically says, hey, this Jesus, he's going to die for everybody. Sounds like a prophecy to me that came true. But not in the way that they were thinking. Because many of the Pharisees, they hear him talking like this and like, oh, yeah, we need to kill this dude so that the nation will be safe from the retaliation of who? The Romans. You and I, looking back, hindsight, we got the New Testament, we get to look at the gospel, we get to see this stuff, and we realize all of a sudden, this guy's prophesying the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, making payment for the sins of mankind, and he doesn't even know it yet. Probably never knew it. God can use that. Can I say something that sounds really strange? God can use hard things in your life. God can use hard people in your life to teach you something. It's okay, God. Where are you at work? What do you have for me today? What do you have for me today? So, here's another lesson we can learn from the triumphal entry. We need to learn to seek God's perspective. and be open to the plans that he has for us. Anyone here planners? Come on. Planners? No planners. The rest of you will fly by the seat of your pants, right? All right, planners, put them up high. Be proud of this. We need you around here. You keep the rest of us straight. It's okay. It's all good. Awesome. Planners. Have you ever had a plan go awry? Man, my wife is a planner, but then introduced me. I have what I like to call the shiny thing syndrome. You know what I'm talking about? Be working. Ooh. You know what I'm talking? Okay. I literally have to study with headphones on so I won't be distracted because I like to be involved in everything. Hey, what's going on? Shiny thing syndrome. We're all planners, or not, we all plan to some degree, but some of you are really planners. What happens when your plan doesn't come to pass? It's a little touchy, isn't it? We need to seek some new perspective, though. Yesterday, my wife and I were driving back from, I don't know what we were doing. She says, hey, let's get the car washed. Okay, let's get the car washed. Plan was driving to go get the car washed. For some reason, my brain is on the destination is the house, which is not the car wash, by the way, unless she gets me on the front yard with a hose, and that's just not happening right now. Too busy. And we get home. We're supposed to get the car washed. Oh, yeah. Go to pull out of our neighborhood, and guess what had happened just behind us as we came into the neighborhood? A pickup truck with a big trailer decides to collide with another vehicle, massive accident right there at the intersection. And I said, I guess God doesn't want the car washed. But we were right there. Our plan was to get the car washed. Had we gotten the car washed, we would have arrived at that corner just a few minutes later, sometime around when the accident happened. See, sometimes God's working saying, no, you don't need the car washed. I got a better plan for you. And sometimes we need to embrace that. And the only way we can embrace things sometimes is change our perspective. Instead of getting your way, you need to embrace God's way. Because God's got a bigger picture. Remember, God kind of had this whole plan from the beginning of time to the end of time. He's got this plan. I think his perspective is better than yours and better than mine. He sees it all. So when it doesn't go our way, okay, God, whatever you're up to, we'll just grab that and roll with it. So those of us who roll with stuff, it's a little easier. For those of us who like to plan and just keep it straightforward, listen, I get it's hard. But learning to do that's going to really help you in life. See, so we need to learn to seek God's perspective and be open to his plans, the plans that he has for you. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 tells us this. Many of you got to know the verses. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Not some, not just the things that are going right. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not into your own understanding. Isn't it amazing how our own understanding gets us into so much trouble? Yeah. It's almost like God said, don't do that. Verse 6. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Anybody think that you're wise? We can have wisdom. God's like, I'm better. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. It will be health to your flesh and strength to your bones. Unique to this triumphal entry is the significance of how the people welcomed Jesus to Jerusalem, the royal city of Israel. They placed him, they wanted to establish him to be a king over them. That's why they got these palm branches out. Like they're welcoming him as a victor, as a king. And by the way, the Pharisees, they know the history of Israel, and they know exactly what's happening here, which got them so upset. The people wanted a political leader. They wanted a king. That was what they wanted. That was their plan. That was their perspective. We just want to be out from underneath the Romans, and that was not God's plan. It's not what God wanted for them. He sent his son to make payment for the sins of all mankind, to set all mankind free, not just a people group from a foreign occupation. Matthew chapter 1, verse 8. And a very great multitude spread their clothes on the road. Others cut down branches from the trees and spread them on the road. Then the multitude who went before and those who followed cried out, saying, Hosanna to the Son of David. They're declaring, by the way, his lineage to the throne. Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. You see, here in the New Testament, the people were publicly offered declaration and petition. Save us now. They cried, Hosanna to the Son of David. This was a title, a messianic title, by the way. The Psalms welcomed Jesus as a ruler, or the Palms welcomed Jesus as a ruler over Israel. And their public cries of Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, was an open call for Jesus to overthrow Rome and rule and basically take over and rule as king over Israel. It was clear to the Pharisees what they were asking Jesus to do. Jesus is taking the gloves off. Prior to this, Jesus is telling people, hey, listen, don't tell people what I did. It's not time yet. And now Jesus is openly being declared as the Messiah. They wanted a deliverer. They wanted a political leader. The palm branches they expressed joy and victory to celebrate the coming of a king or a victor home. And so, publicly speaking, culturally speaking, they were not hiding what they thought or wanted Jesus to do. But there's a deeper understanding here. Why would the religious people be so worried about this procession, if you will? Well, because they remember history. There's an old phrase that says, history has a tendency to... So you're supposed to what from history? Learn. Learn from history, because the history will repeat itself. We're watching that take place in our own nation. There's a history here with palm branches. Did you know this? In Israel, an occupation? Let's break it down. For those of you who went through the Old Testament with us, you're going to get all this. I'm going to give you a 2-second, well, I can't do it 2 seconds, 30-second review. Remember the 400 years of not-so silence? Remember that whole study? Like they call it the 400 intertestament years, the 400 years of silence. God's not prophesying. God's not speaking through people. It's just silence. What's going on? And we unpacked all of that. I'm going to give it back to you brief because you're going to see the significance of what's going on here. Why the Pharisees were so afraid of the Romans. So after the captivity, Israel became a province of the Persian Empire until 331 BC. Around 331 BC, the Alexander the Great, the Macedonian king, he conquered the Persian Empire, right? And who was in the Persian Empire? Jerusalem, the Israelites. In 323 BC, Alexander died at 33 years of age, a little early. I don't know if he was poisoned, killed. I haven't looked into that. I'm sure some of you know. His empire was massive, so what did they do? Well, they divided it up among his generals to kind of keep it all together. So Israel became a successor state. So the land of Israel became known as Judah or Palestine. It was ruled by one of Alexander's generals, Seleucus, and he was a good ruler, but his descendants were mean and wicked and evil. So as more and more descendants kind of piled on, in around 164, 168 BC, the Seleucid rulers, they desecrated the temple of Jerusalem. What is the most sacred place of the Jews? The temple. They desecrated the temple in Jerusalem. When they decided to dedicate God's temple to the Greek god Zeus, they offered a pig as a sacrifice to Zeus on the sacred temple altar. A pig to the Jewish people is an unclean animal, has no place in this, and so they did everything they could to desecrate this temple and remove all the Jewish influence over it. That was a little too much. And if you remember, there's a priest and his 3 sons. They launched this Maccabees revolt, this rebellion, and they succeeded to oust the Romans. Do you know what they did after removing Roman rule? They celebrated in the streets with palm branches. Look what God just did for us. Look what we just did. We got rid of these oppressors. We got rid of these occupiers. We got rid of these evil Roman or the evil rulers that were over us. And we are once again free. And God's making us free. And the palm branches were significant until they couldn't get along. And when they couldn't get along, what happened? They went to the Romans, who seemed to do government really well. And they said to the Romans, hey, help us figure out how to rule properly and how to deal with these problems we're having and all this infighting, all this inner politics. Man, inner politics destroys everything. And so they're trying to get the Romans, hey, help us with this. And the Romans are like, yeah, just do this and just do this and just do this. All the while, the Romans were kind of coming behind the back door. And what did the Romans do? They allowed so much discord. They were so divided, the Romans came in and just took over. Easiest conquest they ever had. Because the Israelites couldn't get along. They're too busy fighting with one another. So imagine these Jewish religious leaders. They know history, and history will repeat itself, and they're looking at streets full of palm branches. And they're terrified. What will the Romans do? what will the Romans do? So the perspective of Jewish leaders is very, very thin. God's got a bigger plan. When faced with uncertainty and fear, just like these religious leaders, we often seem to attack the very thing we need. Turn our back on the very thing we need. We ignore the thing that we need. Religious leaders, here is literally the Messiah coming into the streets. People are not taking notice, and I get it. They want a religious leader. They want a political leader. Jesus was still coming in to do something, and their plan was not just to kill Jesus, but to kill all remnants that he had the power to raise the dead. He's going to take out Lazarus as well. They wanted him gone. Here's the problem. It was harder to kill him than they thought. So what they did is they distanced themselves from Jesus, and without a proper trial, they sentenced him to be killed by the Romans. They went in the Garden of Gethsemane. They took him captive. By the way, they didn't take him. He gave himself. You read the passage. He spoke a few words. They all fell over. He gave himself. Okay? Luke chapter 23 now, verse 1. Then the whole multitude of them rose and led him to Pilate. So now they realize he's not there to establish a new kingdom on earth and oust the Romans. So they're turning on him now. That same crowd that's running around going, Hosanna, Hosanna. Now they're saying, kill him, right? And so Luke chapter 23, verse 1, the whole multitude of them rose and led him to Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, we found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ, a king. By the way, did he ever say don't pay tax to Caesar? It's almost like there's a story somewhere in the Bible where he's saying, hey, render to Caesar. That was just Caesar's. You know, kind of there. And so they're lying about Jesus. And then verse 3, Pilate asked him, saying, are you the king of the Jews? And he answered and said to him, it is as you say. So Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowd, I find no fault in him. Why? Because he's simply saying, if you say it, you say it. Jesus is not going to he's not giving him anything. Jesus knows full well that the Father's plan is for him to be crucified on the Calvary. He knows full well that he's going to the cross. Why defend himself? You said it, not me. Pilate finds no fault in him. And so the religious leaders decide to play politics. John chapter 19, verse 12. From then on, Pilate sought to release him because he found no fault in him, because the Jews cried out, saying, if you let this man go, now listen, you are not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar. Did the religious leaders want Roman rule? No. Were they really Caesar followers? No. But they want Jesus dead. So they're basically saying, if you release him, you're not Caesar's friend. What are they doing? They're playing politics. We are the good and faithful subjects of Caesar, and you're not if you let Jesus go. Playing politics. Now Pilate's kind of in a bad spot. The Romans, they did notice Jesus' activity. They found no fault in him. They were worried about Jesus, but not this treacherous, but not this much. And so these treacherous Jewish leaders, they turned on Pilate. They played the faithful subject of Caesar. You know, they basically turned on, hey, if you don't do this, then you're not Caesar's. And now Pilate's manipulated into taking action. Eventually, Jesus is crucified, which we'll look at next week. The crowd who covered the streets and branches wanted a political leader, but once they realized Jesus had no intention of giving them what they wanted, they turned on him, and they wanted the Romans then to kill him, and they did. They wanted a political leader. They wanted to deliver, or they wanted someone to take them out from underneath bondage. When they can't get their way, what do? They lash out. But what they don't realize is Jesus still accomplished that which he came to accomplish. By dying on the cross, a perfect, spotless lamb, make a payment for the sins of mankind. Jesus made sin a payment that allowed him now to offer salvation to all freely. He delivered Israel from the bondage of sin if they would choose Jesus Christ. That's a greater deliverance. That's a deliverance that has impacted the world since that day. That's a deliverance that was talked about from the very beginning of time back in Genesis chapter 3. That's a deliverance that God can use to change and transform your life and the lives of your friends and the lives of your families. But we have to change our perspective. Listen, it's great when you come to Christ. It's great that you're in a relationship. It's great that you're growing your faith with Jesus Christ. But here's the thing. If you're a disciple, if you're a follower, if you're a child of God, part of your responsibility is to declare Jesus Christ to others. And if you're not, you're missing out on some of the most thrilling opportunities God has for you. Because when you see someone come to Christ who is not a Christ follower, and you realize, man, God let me be part of that. It's a powerful moment in your life. And I pray that this week, as we go into this holy week, that you would look for opportunity to speak Jesus, because people are talking about it. Speak Jesus, but don't just speak Jesus. Don't just play the religious card, but instead get down and speak about what Christ really did, allowing himself to be sacrificed. Why? To pay for the sins of mankind, to pay for your sins, to pay for their sins, and then to freely offer salvation to a world that is condemned. It's a precious gift. It's the greatest gift mankind's ever known. And we need to have a new perspective that simply says, God, why am I here? What am I doing? And how can I be used of you in this moment? Because God can use you if you will open your eyes and see it. God wants to use you. He wants to invite you to be part of these things. It's your choice. It's your choice. What will you do with Jesus Christ this week? Father,